I just finished up an in-frame rebuild on this IH756. Now you'll see when you watch the video that when we started, we were hopeful or intending to only replace the head gasket on the tractor. But once we got the head off and did some inspection, we saw that the rings were seized onto the pistons. Some of the pistons were cracked. The engine was in bad shape. So in this video, you'll be able to follow along the step-by-step process for doing an in-frame overhaul. We went completely down to the bare black and replaced the sleeves, as well as the rings and the pistons, the rod bearings, the head gasket, and so much more that's involved with that process. So follow along and you'll be able to do this repair on your own tractor as well. In this video, I'll walk you through the process step by step for replacing the head gasket on a large 6-cylinder international tractor like the one standing behind me. This one's a 756, but this video and techniques will apply to many, many models of gas international harvester tractors. Now, we know that our head gasket is bad because of a couple reasons. The first is the way that it tries to start and the noises that it makes. When I try to roll over the tractor, you will hear a hissing out of the tractor. So listen closely for that. That's going to be our indication. My tractor's in neutral, so it's safe for me to start it standing next to it. I'm going to press the button and you listen closely to what sound it makes. I hope you could hear that hissing in the engine. That's a sign that maybe one of the valves is too tight, maybe a valve or two has burnt, or definitely there's a problem within the valves, and also with the head gasket is probably going to need replacement as well. Also, our tractor was leaking a little bit in between the head and the bottom end of the engine, which is another indication. One more reason why your head gasket might be bad is if you have water in your engine oil when you drain it, or if the radiator boils over, or if there's any type of oil in your antifreeze or your coolant in your tractor. Those are all indications that your head gasket needs to be replaced. So if your tractor is having those symptoms, then you would definitely want to tear into your tractor and make this repair along with me. Now before we get started, we're going to do one other test, a compression test, to make sure. Here you can see that we pulled the spark plugs out of the tractor. This one is dry. That's how a spark plug should be when we pull it out. The second one here has some moisture on it, which was concerning, definitely concerning. But lastly, we pulled this one out of, I think it was cylinder number 3, and you can see that the spark plug has some physical damage. You can see there's absolutely no compression in this cylinder. We did run the test on a few of the other cylinders and got the same results as well. So now we're excited to go into the engine and see what's going on. The first step for disassembly is always to remove the ground cable of your battery. So do that and then we'll continue with the disassembly. I'm going to take this last bolt off and then this side panel will come down. Just set it in front there. Next we'll go up here where the breather is. And that'll lift off like that. Then I'll go around to the other side and we'll take the muffler off. I already have the muffler clamp off, so it should lift off fairly easy for us. Just like that. You can probably hear that I have my coolant draining. You'll want to do that as well. Also, I'm going to take the cap off of my distributor here. I'm just going to snap both of those off, and there it comes. I did mark where the number 1 is so that when we go to put this back on, it will go easily. Also, these oil coolant lines, I have those removed so that they can pull off here, like that. And then we'll put them up here. Just trying to remove everything that's going to be in way of us coming to get the tappet cover and the head off of the tractor. My air tube will pull off of here, just like that. And I'm going to set that down. Next I'm going to remove the carburetor. I'll just remove these 2 bolts that hold it onto the manifold. We remove these so that it's easier to get the choke cable and the linkage off of the back. Otherwise it's really hard to reach around there. So if we just remove the carburetor and tilt it down a little bit, those cables will come off a lot easier for us. There you go. So I'm just going to set that down there and let it rest while I work on the manifold. I have 1 bolt here left, and then the manifold will come off. There we go. It's loose. My stud's still in there though. I'm going to push up. it's still caught on there. Gonna try again, and then the manifold will come off for us. It's loose, so I'm just gonna pull it out with my finger here. It's gotta be close. All of these bolts behind the manifold are really tight. There we go. It's out, and the manifold will lift off. Now we want to take the air breather off. There's 2 bolts on the bottom, which I already have removed, and then it will pull out. I'm gonna step up a little. There we go. I'm gonna set this down. Now I want you to notice that on the block here, I did drop the coil down. I want to leave the wiring harness on so that we don't have to deal with taking that off and trying to fit it back on again. So you can see that I just have it dropped down with the wiring harness still on, and this side of the tractor is all disassembled. Taking the last bolt out of my tappet cover here, that'll pull off, and then we'll be able to remove the tappet cover. A couple things I want you to notice. One is here that my gas tank is slightly raised. We had to remove the bolts out of the bell housing to loosen this up so that it would lift up. And then we put a board underneath here. Right here you can see it. That lifts the gas tank up so that we have enough clearance to get to the head of the tractor without removing the entire dash and gas tank assembly there. So you could do that step as well. Also, you'll notice I did take the wire off of the alternator so it's not loose and over the tractor. The coil, which I mentioned previously, is off. I'm just going to pull this wire off, and then it will move out of the way even more so that you can easily see what's going on. With that, I'm just going to use a rubber hammer to kind of tap that, and then our cover will lift right off. Now that we have the tappet cover off, we want to inspect, see what's going on there, and you can notice that this valve with the rocker arm here, look how much gap there is. I can stick my finger in between there. Obviously these ones aren't the same, and that's not the way that it should be. So this gap definitely shows us that it sets off an alarm, shows us where the issue might lie. I'm taking the head bolts out now. There's some on this back row by me, and then also up in the front I have all of these loosened. Now these are very tight when you start to take them off, and that's okay. I'm just going to pull these out, when I might have to use a wrench on. There's little washers underneath there too, which you want to pick up. There we go. I'm just going to set these down. And there we go. Here's my last one. Now I'm going to lift the rocker arms up. There we go. And I'll just set this down. And then all of our push rods will come right out. After we get the push rods off, then the next step will be to take the head off. I'll get some help lifting that because it'll be quite heavy. At this point, we're going to do some inspection, and you can see here that our sleeve is visibly cracked. That's probably an extreme crack. Also, the piston is cracked completely across as well. Notice on that head gasket that there's some physical damage up here. There's some other minor damage in between other cylinders, but this is the most major damage on the head gasket. At this point, it is important for you to do some inspection on your tractor and really look things over and make sure that things are thorough. Here you can see the valve that was broken off from the head, and that was what was crashing around in here and caused all of that damage. So thoroughly inspect. If your tractor only needs to have the head gasket done, then you can stop at this point and only replace the head gasket. Or if you do inspection and notice that your pistons and sleeves are damaged, then you'll want to take that one step further so that you do a very thorough job. You're this far into the job, so do all the steps correctly. We're taking the cap off of the piston here. These bolts that hold the cap on are very, very tight when you start. And of course, when we put them back on, we'll torque them to the proper specification. We gotta get them loosened up and off. Looks like I'll be able to do this with my finger now. and the cap will drop right down. The threads on these are pretty long. That one's out completely. That'll fall on my face. We're good. Okay, so there's the cap, and then the piston will come out from the top of the engine. I'm just going to use this piece of wood here to try to help pry up. And, okay, so you can see that it's kind of swinging up there and it's pretty loose. So then we'll go up to the top and see if we can pull it the rest of the way. If not, we'll come back down to the bottom and try to release it up a little bit more. We were able to drop the pan from the tractor. First we did drain the engine oil, then we remove all the bolts on the outside perimeter of the pan, and then it will drop down. Next we took the bottom cap off of the piston so it would release, and we pulled it out of the top of the engine. On the side here you can see a very big crack, and then also on the top of the piston there's a smaller crack here. Definitely very damaged piston, so this has to be replaced. Next we'll take the sleeves out of the tractor and replace those as well. I'm pulling the sleeve out of the motor here. Now you can see that the contraption I have here is a homemade sleeve puller, but I wanted to use this so that you could see how it's done and potentially make your own sleeve puller in your shop as well. Now tool manufacturers do make a very specialized tool for pulling sleeves, and you may have that in your shop and that's fine, you can use it. But it is a specialized tool, and I figured that some people might not have it and would rather do something like this for pulling their sleeves. So I have two parallels hooked up here, which you can see here. Then I have this threaded rod through a disc that we made, and it looks like I'm loose here. This is going to pull out. Let me get these parallels out of the way. I want to give you a closer view of this disc that's in the bottom of the engine. This one that we used is off of a hydraulic pulley, something that we had in the shop that we could recycle for this purpose. You can use whatever is convenient for you if you're going to use this method for pulling your sleeves. The inside of this is the same, or is the correct diameter for the piece of threaded rod that we used. Obviously that can be changed and adjusted for the specifics of your engine and the parts that you have in your shop. So you can see that when we cut it on the lathe here, we made it so that it would fit easily right into the sleeve. You can see that it fits there. And then this bottom lip of the disc is slightly smaller than the bore of the engine, ever so slightly smaller, so that it will fit in there and pull up through the bore. Now I'm ready to clean the cylinder bore. I'm going to use this silicone carbide ball cutter on the end of my cordless drill so that it can get completely clean. Now when I use this attachment, I want to make sure that it's going around when I put it in and also going around when I come back out. That way there's no grooving that happens onto the bore. You want to be careful not to do any damage here. Now whatever type of attachment you choose to use for this step, be certain to use something that's not going to cut or groove, like I said. This step, we're just trying to get it clean. So I like to use an attachment like this on the end of my cordless drill, and we'll do that like so. I'm going to put it in with it going around, like I said. And I'm going to come out and switch directions. Now be careful when you go in, that because our block is still on the tractor and the crankshaft is in the tractor, you don't want to go too far down that you hit the crankshaft. So we're just doing this up here at the top. I'm going to go the other direction. Okay, I'm going to pull this out, set it down, and then I'm just going to use some carb cleaner to spray in here to try to get that clean. I want to get all of the dust out of the bore here. I've got a rag. Might want to do this a couple times until your rag comes out clean. Make sure to get all those particles out. You want this to be really clean before we put our new sleeve in. The next step that we want to get clean is this ledge right here. You can use a O-ring pick or something similar to just get all the crud out of the ledge there. Be sure to get that really clean before we put the sleeve in. Okay, my sleeve is completely in. I want to talk to you a little bit about the process of what we did. First, when the bore was completely clean, we were ready to insert the sleeve. Now I had all of my sleeves in the freezer so that they could get really cold and shrink just a tad bit, so that there was a little bit of give so that it could more easily go into the bore. So with them frozen, we had to work really quickly. We did spray it with some WD-40 just to make it a little bit more slippery. And then sometimes when you put the sleeve on there, you can wiggle it down and it'll go in pretty far. Sometimes it'll only go in a few inches like we saw on just there, and then you can gently tap it in the rest of the way. Now I used a piece of wood in between the sleeve and the block, and then I used a dead blow hammer to tap that in. You don't want to use a steel hammer at all. If you use a steel hammer, this will happen and you'll break your sleeves. So you don't want to do that at all. Your sleeves are fragile, so you need to be careful when you do this process. Take some care. You do need to work quickly, but you also need to really work carefully so that you don't do damage to your sleeve. One other thing is that your sleeves are directional. You'll see a little bit of a lip that goes to the top on this tractor, so you'll want to also pay attention to the lip on your sleeves and get them in the right way. At this point, we're ready to reassemble the piston to the rod. First, we're going to disassemble. We'll reuse the rods and put new pistons on. So there's some wrist pin locks on the end here, which you can just get with some pliers. You pinch them together and then pull them out like that. Okay. There's one on the other end, which I'll get next. Like so. Be sure to wear safety glasses because sometimes those will fly in. And then we'll push the wrist pin through so that the piston will come off of the rod. Just going to use a punch here and drive it through. Like so. Go a little bit more. There we go. Now before I take the piston off of the rod, I want to talk about the direction. You want to put your pistons on in the same direction as the direction that they came off in. You can see this crown here that lines up specifically to the valve train in the head. And if you put them on backwards, you'd have to redo it all over again. So it's really important that you get the crown in the right direction. So I'm going to take this off. Notice too there, all of the C's in the rings there, just more of an indication that this absolutely needs to be done for this tractor. So I'll pull that off, and then we'll be ready to put the new piston on, again in the same direction. So the crown will be back here for how I have mine. Before we put it on, there are some little temporary keepers in there where the wrist pin locks are, probably just for shipping to protect them. So we'll pop both of those out, and then we'll move the wrist pin to the side so that it can go through. I'm going to push that through, and then I'll put a little bit of lubricant on there just so that when it initially starts up it doesn't run dry. And I'll move it around there. Okay, there we go. Again, in the right direction. This will go on there, and then we'll slide it across. There, it's secure. Then we have two new wrist pin keepers to put on there. Got my new ones here. And you put them on in the same manner as how you took the other ones off. Just like that. You can push the wrist pin all the way back to the other side and then put your last keeper on. There we go. Now we're ready to put the rings onto our piston. Now when you get your rings in the kit, they will come numbered like this or something similar in the package. Pay special attention to what number is which. We're going to start with number 3, which is going to go at the bottom of the piston here. This is the top of the piston, this is the bottom. So number 3 will go in this groove. Number 3 is the oil control ring, and it is 2-part. Start by talking about this part. You can see that it expands here. Oops, probably don't want to take that apart, but I'll put it back together. Okay, so you can see that it will expand like that. So we're going to slip that on here first, and you can see that it goes in the bottom groove there out of the 3 grooves. And then I'll slide this around so you can see it. I tightened up that gap that's in there. Okay. Now we have the second part of the ring here, which will expand and clip over that this part of the ring. Oops, I just expanded it there again. Push it back together. There we go. Now I do have some pliers like this to help with the rings. They'll separate, I'll hold it like this so you can see. They're gonna separate the ring and then it will slide over top of the piston. Now some people like to do this with their hands and not use the tool. If you can do that, that's okay, but these rings are fragile and it's easy to snap them if you give too much pressure. So be careful. I think when you're working on a larger piston like this one, the tool's kind of essential. But if you're working on a tractor that has smaller pistons, you might be able to get away with just using your fingers. So I'm gonna spread this apart here and then it'll snap in. I'm watching for it to go over top of that second part. There we go. Okay, I'm going to turn this around so you can see it. You can see that it just snapped right on there and that it's secure. You can kind of tighten it up a little bit by hand if you feel like it needs it. So now that ring is set. Now let's move on to ring number 2. These ones are directional, so you'll need to look for some type of indication. Some of the rings will say top, some of them will have a letter. These ones have a dot, which maybe you can see it right there. That's what goes towards the top. Your rings will come with instructions, so I would advise reading them just in case your rings are from a different manufacturer or something and they're slightly different. Just want to be certain they are directional. You also see that some of the rings do come with just a slight of a give. This one does too. So there's my dot for the top. I'm going to stretch this over again in the same manner. And we'll put this in the second groove. Oops. When you're using this tool, you do want to be careful not to scratch the piston at all. You can take that off and try again here. If you do end up scratching the piston, you could use some really fine sandpaper and smooth it over before you put it in the tractor. But as always, it's best to try to not scratch the piston. Okay, so I'm caught in the first groove back here. There we go. We're over. I'm going to snap it in. Looks like I need to stretch a little bit more. There we go. Okay, you can see it's in the second groove there. Moves freely there. Okay. Now we'll put the top one on. This one's the same manner. Again, this one's directional, so you got to look for that dot. Right there it is, which will go towards the top. And we'll slide it right over. There we go. Now all of our rings are on the piston. You'll want to do this for all 6 of your pistons. We are ready to put the pistons and rods into the engine, but first I want to talk to you a little bit more about the rings. Now notice that there's a gap on the rings. It is important that you put them in certain locations. So the oil control ring you want to have opposite of the wrist pin. You'll see that my wrist pin is here and my gap for the oil control ring is opposite of that and not in direct line with the wrist pin. And then my top 2 rings, I like to put 180 degrees between each other. Don't line all of the gaps up together. That's just for compression purposes. You'll do better if you have them dispersed evenly like I just mentioned. So be sure to do that with your rings, and then you'll put this ring compression tool around, and then you'll be ready to drop your piston into your piston and rod into the tractor. So I have mine in here ready to go. Now on all of your rods there's numbers and it matches the bottom cap as well. So both the rod and the bottom cap will say number 2 for this cylinder, for example. Now the number is going to face the camshaft. That could be different on a different engine if you're working on something differently. So be sure to consult your manual and make sure that you get the pistons going, or the rods going in the correct direction. And for ours, the number 2 would be on this side of the engine where the camshaft is. Also, like I mentioned before, there's a crown on the top of the piston which will work properly with the valve train and the head when we get to setting that on. So you again want to pay attention to the direction of your pistons as well as your rods. So with that, I have my piston number 2 in here. My rings are all set. I've got my ring compression tool on here. Now I'm going to gently tap this down into the motor. There we go. This will come off. I do have my crankshaft in the correct position so that this can go down properly. That's important to pay attention to before you push these down. Now they do need to go down a little bit more, and then we'll secure this on the bottom. Now when you put your rods into the tractor, obviously you're going to do this step from underneath the tractor. But it's easier for me to show you the lock. You can see a lot better outside the tractor, so I'm going to talk about it now. You can see that there's a small lock in this bearing. That's important that you put lock to lock. There's a lock both in the cap and as well in the rod. You need to do that when you replace your bearings here to get it lock to lock. Then when you put your piston together, again, you put lock to lock. Another check is that there's a number here, number 1, and number 1 is on both sides of the rod and the cap together. So that's 2 ways that you can double check and make sure that you're getting that all assembled properly. Now when you're doing that, you definitely want to use some lube. I forgot to mention earlier that when you put the pistons in, you're using lube as well. That way if you roll the engine over before you're ready for your initial start, the components are all lubed and you don't have to worry about any dry seizing in there. So definitely use some lube. Then you want to torque these bolts to the proper specification. So for this tractor, it's 50 pounds. It's probably going to be more or less for the tractor that you're working on. So definitely consult a manual and figure out what the proper torque specification is, and then do that. Put both of your bolts in here, and then your rods will be all secured into the engine. I'm tightening up all the bolts on my pan here. I do have a gasket underneath there with some sealer, and before I did that, I did clean the surface with an abrasive so that we get a really tight seal. I'm going to put all these bolts back in the bottom here. This head is what we took off of the tractor. Obviously you can see the damage where some of the valves are burnt out, and definitely the one valve that was broken off completely has caused damage to the head. Now you have a couple choices at this point. Some people will take their head to a machine shop and have it resurfaced and redone so that they can put this exact head back on the tractor. That's certainly something that you could do. Another option would be to buy a replacement head from a salvage yard and put that onto your tractor. I feel that this head is probably beyond repair to what would be affordable for us for this project. So therefore it's more advantageous for us to just buy a replacement head from a salvage yard. That's going to be cheaper for us. When we pull out the replacement head from the salvage yard, it came with the valves completely redone, the springs, the keepers, everything on the valve train is set and ready to go onto the tractor. We do have a new head gasket ready to go on the tractor. We sprayed some copper coat sealer on both sides of the gasket, and you'll probably want to do the same since the gasket is metal, and that will help you get a very sure seal on that head gasket. So we'll put the head gasket on, and then we'll put the new replacement head on the tractor. One quick note about the head gasket is that it is directional. You'll see on this side that it's very smooth. The smooth side goes towards the bottom here, towards the block. And then on this side, you'll see a slight fold over on the top here. That's going to go towards the top. Also make sure that both areas of your surface are completely clean. We took some abrasive to clean up the block and also the other surface of the head so that we get a really good seal here. You can see that my head is on the engine. I also have the rocker arm assembly all set. There's head bolts that go through the rocker arms, and then there's smaller head bolts that go on this side where I am. You want to torque these down to the proper specification. For this tractor, it's between 85 and 95 pounds of pressure. That may be different for the engine that you're working on, so definitely consult your manual and figure out that proper specification. Also, you have to tighten the head bolts down in a certain sequence or order, again following what the manual states. So normally for most of them you start in the middle and you just try to evenly space them out, but for this one you start here and you go around and torque them to that 85 to 95 pounds of pressure. Taken this bolt out of the cartridge here, we're going to go ahead and change the oil, or put new oil in, I guess, since most of the oil is out. This cartridge will pull off. I'll try to tap it with a hammer here. There we go. I've got a pan underneath there to catch this extra oil. There we go. And you can see our filters here. We're going to clean the cartridge, replace the filter, and then there's a small O-ring seal at the bottom. I'm going to pick that out and replace that as well. At this point, you'll want to set the valves on your tractor. In order to do that, your piston for the cylinder that you're working on needs to be at the top dead center position. So if you were going to start with cylinder number 1, you'd set both of the first 2 valves, intake and exhaust, for cylinder number 1, and you would press the starter button until it is in the proper position. You'll know that your cylinder number 1 is in the correct position when the first valve for cylinder number 2 begins to go down. That's your key indicator there that cylinder number 1 is in the correct position and you can set the valves. So for this tractor, the specification is 27 thousandths. Use a gauge like this one, and you insert it between where the retainer is on the valve and the rocker arm, where those touch. You gotta set that gap to the proper amount for your tractor. This one's 27 thousandths, but if you're working on a different model, it could be different. So definitely consult your manual, because that gap is really important. Even though you know, they seem similar, it is very important. You need to pay attention to that. So when you're setting your valves, you can see that there's a screw head on the top of here that will raise or lower your rocker arm to the correct gap. And then this jam nut is what you would tighten up to hold the screw head in the proper position. So you can set that, and then once you have it tightened up, always double check it and make sure that that gap is at the proper length. Of course, when you move along the cylinders here, you'll need to press the starter button and move your piston to top dead center. Again, you have to do that for every single cylinder when you're working on it. Next, you'll see that we have our distributor hooked up here. We have a new distributor cap. We also put a new dust cover in it. We did mark where number 1 was when we took it apart. Hopefully you marked yours as well. We were able to follow that sequence with our new distributor cap here. The firing order for international is right on the block, so it's easy to follow along. Number 1 is always closest to the radiator, so you can follow along and get all of your wires in the correct order for your firing order. You also see that we have our coil hooked up here. We have the wire on the coil. Also, we finished everything up with the oil. We put new oil in it, and we put the canister back on here, so that's all set. Now we're going to go over to the other side of the tractor and button things up over there. You can see everything that's hooked up on this side of the tractor. We have the carburetor with the manifold and the muffler on it. We have the oil lines hooked back up, coolant in the radiator. You can see that our wires are hooked back up to the alternator. So everything is intact to the point that we can start the tractor. So let's start it up and see how it runs. The tractor sounds good. Our rebuild job will be complete once we put our sheet metal on. I hope that this video is helpful to you when you overhaul the engine on your tractor. We do have several other repair videos on a variety of topics at steinertractor.tv.